What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Weekly Dial In, the show where I dial in a different coffee every week and guide you through the process. This week is a special episode. It is a collaboration with Cat and Cloud Coffee over in Santa Cruz, California. We've got this coffee, a Mexico from Tapachula, Mr. Eduardo Esteve. So the way today's episode is going to work is I'm going to get on the phone with Mark. We are going to do the Mexico together as espresso. And at the end, I'm going to call Mark back and see how our dial-ins compared. How's it going?
It's good, man. Yeah, how are you?
Good. It's 95 with a heat index of 107 over here.
Oh my God. That's
if you hear my AC blasting in the background, that's why.
I was gonna say, if you hear a refrigerator or a pump turn on, it's because this cafe is very echoey. So, yeah, man. Oh, Alex is right here.
Yo, what up, dude?
Where would you start with this coffee if you were dialing it in as a single origin espresso?
Yeah, definitely. So my general approach with any of our single origins is to use the same recipe that we use for the Truth, which is our other kind of lighter and brighter espresso recipe. So it's optimized at a 2-to-1 ratio, which I'm pretty sure is similar to what you're doing. And one of the reasons it works, like we're going for that with a slightly bigger the recipe for that is like 20 grams in, 26 to 32 seconds, and around 40 to 44 grams out. And part of the reason we're doing a little bit of a bigger dose is just because of the baskets that we have. They're like instead of a home espresso machine, they're like a heavier, like 20 gram basket from Pullman. So, yeah. And that's just, again, coming from more of like a commercial standpoint.
Guys, itty bitty, if you can see that.
Definitely, yeah. Is that like a 17 to 19 gram in that zone?
I think so.
Sweet. Yeah,
it might even be a little smaller. It might be like a 16.
Yeah, and then you're even getting into like is it like I'm curious why, like I might try a shot at your input because usually go 17 to 18 grams in, right?
Oh, I'll probably start at like 17, 35.
Awesome.
That's where I've been. That's been my sweet spot kind of lately. I went a different direction on another coffee, and I kind of like what's the expression, like was kicking myself when I started because I ended up kind of where I thought I was going to start out anyway. But it was cool to like go from like an unfamiliar, like a relatively unfamiliar recipe and then kind of guide your way back home and see what that was like.
Definitely kind of find the roadmap along the way. Just, it's like being out on the trail in the Sierras and like finding like little cairns, like stacks of rocks, and like if you can see the next one, you know where you're going.
It's like 17 minutes-ish after you want to, like, I guess maybe like 25 minutes, 30 minutes from now, I'll text you when I'm done, or you text me when you're done, and we'll talk at the end on
Definitely.
the other side.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Yeah, I'll see where we got and yeah, how we got there. Awesome.
Sweet,
David. Awesome. And I'll start the timers, set the numbers. All right, we'll talk soon, man.
All right, well, let's get started. All right, so we got 17 in, 35 out, and about 24 seconds. So let's see where this is at. So we're both starting at a 1-to-2 ratio, which is usually where I go for single origin coffees. This is smelling a little bit on the toastier side. Some nice, almost like, I don't want to say burnt marshmallow, but very, very toasted marshmallow. Yeah, very syrupy. There's like a nice, like pleasant bitterness on the back. Well, let this cool for a second. Okay, some nice acidity starting to come out now. It's feeling like there's a little lack of clarity. Last week I said the word tight, which usually I mean it's kind of feeling a little bit heavy. It's feeling a lack of clarity. And the reason why I use tight to describe it is because I think the grind is maybe a little bit too tight, or maybe the ratio is a little bit too tight. It's not really the best descriptor in the world, but That's sort of the first thing that comes to mind for this. So I'd like this to have a little bit more clarity and I think a tiny bit more extraction. There's like a lot of caramels and like kind of like darker, richer flavors coming through and not as much of that acidity. There's a little bit kind of poking through, but I'd like to bring that out and kind of make that a bit more prominent. So I'm gonna let it run a little bit longer. That last shot went to 35 grams out. So I'm gonna take it a little bit closer to 40 and see what happens. Okay, so now we're at 17 and 40 grams out. It only took a couple extra seconds. This was 26-second shot. It's still like kind of marshmallowy, but almost like, I think I've used this before, but like baked sweet potato with marshmallow on top, a bit more like that. So it's still pretty hot, but let's see how this is tasting. A little bit juicier actually. That bitterness on the back end is still there, but it's a little bit more balanced, a little bit more in the background. Yeah, this is a lot juicier now. There's a little bit of, it's hard to describe. It's either like a paperiness or a sort of like really earthy vegetable note. But I like the way this is going. There's a lot more acidity there, a lot more juicy of a shot. So right now for me, it's this finish, which is a little bit bitter, in a kind of an unpleasant way. And this fruitiness and this like nice acidity that's in the front. I'm trying to just balance those. And my hunch is that the shot is probably a little bit under extracted. So going a bit finer might bring out those fruity characteristics and make them a little bit more prominent and push those bitter flavors back into the background a little bit more. You want to have bitterness in espresso because, I mean, coffee and espresso are bitter beverages. It's part of it, but it shouldn't be the dominating characteristic. So let's try going a little bit finer. The last shot was 26 seconds, 40 grams out, 17 grams in. So let's see if we can't get it closer to like a 28 or 30-second shot. So we got 40 grams out in 27 seconds. Let me forget. I often forget to turn off the shot cam. But the pre-infusion was way different. This happens a lot with this grinder where sometimes I'll fine it up maybe one or two little notches on the finer setting. So there's sort of a macro and micro setting on this grinder. And going a couple of settings finer on the micro side sometimes doesn't get you much more of a difference time-wise. But if you have a bottomless portafilter and you're able to see what's going on, there actually is a little bit of a difference in the way the shot brewed up. Yeah, so those baked notes, those like kind of marshmallowy things, not quite as prominent as before. So maybe like a marzipan, maybe like a brown sugar kind of thing going on. It smells a lot lighter and a lot brighter. A little bit, I don't know if clean is a good word to describe the way something smells. I guess you could say this espresso smells really clean. I think we typically want things to smell clean. So far, so good. I'm kind of waiting for that bitterness to bite at the very end. Sometimes you kind of have to let things sit on your palate for a minute before you really know what's going on. And part of what's great about dialing in at home is that you don't really have a lot of other stuff going on. In fact, you can sit in front of a camera and talk about dialing in all day, and you've got time to do it. Yeah, the fruit's way more prominent. It's really mellow. There's a little bit of that like bitter kick coming at the end, but it's really in the background. I'm wondering if one more shot going a tad bit finer could do it and get that out of there. I've talked a little bit on the show before about the sort of parabolic curve of extraction where you're going from under, you shoot up, and there's a sort of hump at the top where there's lots of good extractions, and then you can keep going finer and finer and finer. So start up relatively coarse, going finer, 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 and then there's a point where it dips back down because you don't have the flow rate, you don't have enough contact with the grounds, everything's just kind of clumping together and not extracting the way that it should. So all that talking, I'm gonna give this another sip. That's really tasty, but just for the sake of argument, I want to go a little bit finer and see what will happen if we push this coffee a little bit more, if we're gonna get a little bit higher on that curve or if we're gonna go down the other way. So, be right back. So that time it went to 41 grams out and took about 28 seconds. Thought I smelled something a little bit smoky there for a second, but it's not there anymore. Very similar nose to the last shot, to be honest. Not quite as mellow as the last shot. I'm gonna let it cool for another second, but my first impression is that we've gone off the cliff a little bit, and now this is starting to get back into a shot that's not so tasty. But you never know. I've had lots of coffees that were served to me, pour-overs especially. Actually, I think Chemex's in particular, that at first tasted really bitter when they were hot. And then as they cooled off, they weren't really over-extracted at all. They were actually really, really tasty. So let's give it a sec. As I'm waiting for this to cool, I should say thank you so much to Mark and Alex over at Cat and Cloud. This has been really fun. I'm glad we're getting to dial in and taste all these coffees together, especially at a time where we can't really see that much of anybody. It's been fun to get on Zoom and have these conversations and talk about coffee. We've been serving Cat and Cloud over at G&G for quite a little while now, and gotta say that I appreciate everybody who has been in touch with us and just everybody in the company in general who I've gotten to meet. Fantastic group of people. So now for this espresso. Nope, too far, too much. The last one was excellent. This one is starting to get into soy sauce territory. I hate to say, I'm being as honest as possible. The last shot was excellent.
That's really tasty.
Super juicy, really balanced. A little bit of bitterness on the back end, but really delicious. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave it today. This is a nice example of how you can grind finer and finer and get to this really nice place, or actually in this case, expand your output a little bit increase extraction, get to this really nice place, and then push it a little bit too far and end up over the cliff. Okay, Mark just finished up, so let's see what they came up with.
Yo,
Hey.
how'd it go?
It was good.
It's good.
Definitely went through the whole gamut of tasting okay to tasting delicious to tasting not good. Like going pretty much over the cliff over extraction.
I think we had similar journeys.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think we started off like it was crazy how promising the first shot tasted, but it was for sure under extracted. And second shot was in a similar fashion, and we started finding the grind up a little bit. And there was a weird spot in the middle. I don't know if I would say it was properly over extracted, but it was definitely way into the zone where it was highlighting some of the like roastier dark chocolate aspects of the coffee, and it washed out the acidity. But yeah, we found a sweet spot at the end of the grind adjustments that was good. So yeah, I'm curious, like how do you want to dive into the conversation?
Well, that's a good question. Because I guess I started out with that 1-to-2 ratio, doing like 17 in, 35 out, and my grinder was kicking out about 24 seconds at first, and it was like a lot of that like kind of bitter roasty chocolatiness, not really a whole lot of fruit at all. So, and I kind of caught myself using this descriptor that's not really that useful, where I say like this shot feels really tight, as in like either the grind's like way too fine or like the ratio is just like way too like dense. So I sort of broke the rules a little bit. Instead of going like finer and coarser right away, I went higher. I went to 40 grams out. So 17 and 40 grams out. It took like 26 seconds. And then find that up. And then I got this like really nice balance of like really juicy fruit and like a little bit of like pleasant bitterness on the end. And then I tried going a little bit finer after that to see if I could like just emphasize all of the fruitiness of the coffee and kind of just have a tiny sliver of that like bitter aftertaste. And it just went into like soy sauce territory.
Oh, whoa.
Where it was just like very, very intense and very like kind of punch you in the mouth sort of thing.
That's crazy. Yeah, we had almost similar journeys, but my end result was different. So I started off, the first shot that I pulled was, again, I stuck with the 1-to-2 ratio the whole time. So it was 20.1 grams in at about 19 seconds. So it was really, really fast to get to 44 grams out, which is what the volumetrics were set at on the machine. And the first shot was just so punchy up front. Like it just had, I was saying it was like a green apple, what's the candy called? Jolly Rancher. Yeah, like a green apple Jolly Rancher, where it was like really, really sweet, a little sour and punchy. But then it was kind of like a logarithmic graph where it just like tail dipped after that. And I got into the zone of like dry, ashy, just not pleasant. So rather than, since I was on the lower end of my dose, I was working between like our recipe for the truth is like 20.1 to 20.6. I decided to go, instead of making a grind adjustment right away, just go up to the top of that dose recipe and see what happens. And it was all right. Went to 20.5, and it ended up just kind of like muddying the acidity a little bit. Like it was like, it kind of hung out at the peak of a logarithmic before going down again. But again, I got into that zone of kind of more like burnt, bitter, a little bit like I was describing it, kind of like we have a ice cream place here that does a marshmallow fluff on top of the ice cream, and then they'll hit it with a blowtorch. So it was kind of like, it had like a sweet creaminess behind it, but there was that like burnt ashiness on top. So yeah, from there I tightened it up, and the shots in between were not very good. Like I was definitely in that zone of more of like soy sauce, but I also didn't change my dose. So ultimately I ended up, once the grinds went through, I think I did 2 rounds of fining before I got to the kind of a happy place. But I was at 20.1, so I went back to the entry dose that I was at with the slightly finer grind, and my time was 24 seconds. So it wasn't that much longer than my initial shot, but it made such a world of difference in developing like the finish and the creaminess and the like Jolly Rancher acidity. It kind of like mellowed out a little bit. It's kind of more of like a traditional, just like straight up green apple. So like, you know, like fruit, like brightness. But that just molded into like a really like high percentage dark chocolate, still having some of the creaminess and mouthfeel from the like marshmallow fluff that I had been getting before out of it. So yeah, this coffee was really interesting. I was like really surprised with it. I don't know, what did you think of the actual like coffee itself?
I liked it. I was surprised because when I first started grinding it, just like the smell of the ground coffee smelled a lot more developed than what I got in the cup. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned like toasted marshmallows, because I definitely picked up on the nose something between, I think it went from like a very, very toasted, like almost burnt marshmallow to like, you know, you have like sweet potatoes and marshmallow, you pull that out of the oven after it's got brown on the top. Something sort of like that going on.
Oh, yeah. Just like grandma used to make.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a lot juicier than I thought it was going to be. I had trouble kind of pinpointing the fruit quality, like exactly. I don't know if it's because it's so late in the day or it's just hot over here, or I'm just having like an off day with my palate. But I really liked like the way that it was balanced in the end. I don't know. It'd be interesting to pull this over the next couple of days. And your roast date is different than mine, right?
Yeah, this was roasted on I believe it was roasted on the 9th. So I'm about like 11 days off roast.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm on the 1st.
Okay, so yeah, you're pretty deep into the game, but not too far off. That's a little closer. I mean, a week's difference does make a big difference, but yeah.
Yeah, it probably explains how you're getting like more of like a punchy Jolly Rancher kind of quality.
Totally. I do really, what you said about the development though struck me as well, because I think using the truth recipe and the 1-to-2 ratio, that is more by design akin or like related to lighter roast coffees, I think, you know, that are a little bit less developed. So I think the fact that this was outside of those specs, because our time frame for that is like 26 to 32 seconds, and my favorite shot was 24 seconds. I think that does speak to the development, where this is a single origin where we've roasted it a little bit further, like even just probably a few percentage points further, but how you just that leads to like needing to extract it a little bit less to get to those fruity notes, and then but going past those kind of takes you into that like really burnt like kind of darker chocolate zone that, you know, some people may prefer, but I like a little fruit.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the things that I was just thinking about as I was pulling the shots though was, and just from watching your videos, was just the difference of like, I mean, I hit one button and then I step back and I just watch what happens. And when you're making a shot, you're adjusting the pre-infusion like as you're going. So I don't know. I just thought that was like an interesting point of difference in like, and you're like my output was set, but your output like fluctuates slightly. But it's interesting. We seem to get kind of similar results throughout, even though we're working on like very different machine setups. So I don't know. That was just a point of interest after you mentioned that.
Yeah. What are you guys doing? Are you doing any pre-infusion on the Strata?
So yeah, it's not like a true pre-infusion, but the way these group heads are set up is when you start the shot, there's a 3-second window where the valve or the valve opens up, but with no pressure behind it. So it lets water go through and saturate the puck and fill up the headspace. And then at 3 seconds, the pressure starts to ramp up. So then it goes up to 9 bars after that. So, and we just like that because it does, I think it reduces your chances of channeling, having a saturated coffee bed before applying pressure. I think sometimes when pressure just goes full on, you're more likely to kind of pit out your bed of coffee. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I don't really have a way to measure the pre-infusion like quality because there's no pressure gauge on like my group, and there's no like temperature or anything. Like a lot of this is very much like just kind of by sight and feel, but it sounds like it's somewhat similar. So like without any waterline pressure, opening up the pump and letting it run for like 5 seconds or so, just until it saturates. Then cutting the pump off and letting whatever pressure's built up kind of just sit there and hang out for, I think I was going anywhere between like 10 and 15 seconds on this coffee.
Okay, cool. Yeah, is that normal? Like, what's your usual window for pre-infusion?
About 10 to 15.
Okay, cool.
But what's interesting is sometimes I'll make an adjustment, and it happened with this coffee where I'll go a couple steps finer, and the time doesn't really change that much. It might be like a second or like 2 seconds slower. But looking at the pre-infusion and the way that like the puck saturates, it's totally different.
Definitely. Yeah, that was, I definitely like relate to that in the sense that we're like, one thing that I was commenting on with these bigger like espresso, like commercial espresso grinders is I think there's just more with a bigger burst set and a longer shoot, there's more coffee that'll get caught up in somewhere within those processes. So I was purging a lot more than I see you usually do. And I was also like not tasting, there were a couple shots that I dumped just because spec wise they were exactly the same, so I didn't taste it until it changed by at least 1 second, because then I know that I was in that zone where the grind had kicked in. But very, very similar in that a lot of the time a grind adjustment that I would make would only cater to like 1 to 2 seconds of actual change. But again, I think it's more about like knowing that when you see that time change, that means that your water is touching all the different like exposed surfaces of the freshly ground coffee that's, you know, whether it's either coarser or finer depending on which way you went. So, and yeah, I was trying to talk about it in the sense of like how I would dial in the morning if this was like a new coffee and I was on bar. So I kind of very much approached it that way, where like I had my 30-minute window until the shop opened up and I had to be serving this to people. So yeah, awesome,
nice.
Yeah, I like this coffee a lot though. I was really surprised by it. Like I don't know what I expected, but it's good. Like,
yeah, I mean, when I think of like Mexican coffee as like an origin, like, I mean, this is a huge generalization, obviously, but like lower elevation coffees, more sugar, more one notey, and not exactly like a very bright or like juicy, fruity coffee at all. So that really surprised me how much like complexity there was, and like how, and maybe it's because mine's like 2 weeks out, but how mellow and like friendly it was as a shot.
Definitely, yeah. And now it's interesting. I think that week's difference, that probably was the difference, because I was like equally blown away by like the Jolly Rancher, like green apple. Like it was like really, really sweet and really, really punchy. And I was like, the first shot that I tasted, I was just like, whoa, that's good. Also, maybe it's just because I hadn't tasted espresso out of ceramic in a while, because I've been drinking it out of little paper to-go cups. But
yeah,
it was nice to get some hands on with an actual espresso machine. It was making me make coffee for people a lot. I had a very nostalgic dial-in.
Nice, that's awesome.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Yeah, this is cool. It's fun to be able to like geek out about things like this and like in the different settings. But it's really interesting to me that we had similar paths to like slightly different results. And I think you could kind of attribute the main differences to the age of the coffee, in a sense of having that like 1 week time. And I'm curious what this coffee would be like 5 days off roast, you know, like as espresso, like super like perfectly degassed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. It's interesting to hear, like, how, yeah, like you were saying, how similar, like, we ended up, even with, like, the week's difference, but then, like, the, like, totally different, like, you were grinding on a peak and using a Strata, and I've got a little, like, Baratza Vario, and, like, 8-year-old, rocket that, I mean, that's my job to tune that thing up, and I don't really know. I'm not a professional tech. I think that's another big difference with like home espresso is you kind of have to be into like working on your own machines and be into like sort of like little weird imperfections here and there. Whereas like at a shop, obviously you guys have somebody like keeping it tip top all the time.
Yeah. I mean, you do like the 6-month biannual maintenance and like have that stuff come through, and having someone on staff that's like educated for that is definitely helpful. But I think it's also important for baristas to be like educated when there is an issue, because sometimes I feel like something will stop working and then like you don't like, oh, why is it purging for like 20 seconds when it used to purge for like 3 seconds or something like that. So it's also still, I feel like it's important to take that home espresso lens that you have and like take that to your commercial equipment just to make sure it's all everything's working and functioning properly. Alex is getting his finger in the shot. I don't know if I'm get it in. No. Alex, you want to say hi to Alex?
Yo,
Hey.
dude, those shots were so good.
I gave Alex a couple sneak peeks.
Yeah, it was pretty
Good.
insane. I really wanted a cappuccino with that last shot you pulled.
All right, so that does it for this week's episode of the Weekly Dial-In. It's really fun to hang out with Mark and Alex and go through dialing in this coffee together. Curious to know what you all thought. If you'd like to see more of this stuff, let me know. And this week's question, do you prefer dialing in a little demi-tasse or big mug like this? Do you like to get your nose in there, or do you like to just kind of sip it out of this little guy? Let me know what you think, and I will see you all next week. Take care.